My father had some private schooling when he was young. When he was older, he had to attend school, which was very far from home. Every day, he needed to finish all his homework at school, as his time after school belonged to family duties, including weaving a certain amount of fabric, which was to be sold at a farmer's market every 10 to 15 days. When he became a teenager, my father insisted on going to the capital city of the county to study. My grandmother didn't want him to go, as he was much needed at home. She figured if we find him a wife and get him married, he would then stay, become a strong farmer for the family, and then raise his own children to carry on the family line. Therefore, they managed to find a girl for him. When he went on an arranged blind date, my father saw that the girl had a pig belly-shaped face and instantly disliked her. With much determination, he refused this marriage arrangement and overtook many difficulties before he was finally able to go to the capital city, where he eventually met my mother. When my father told me this story, there was always an unnoticeable trace of contempt on his face. I always thought to myself, how lucky. If father had married that pig-belly-faced woman, wouldn't he have been trapped in the countryside? If that were the case, there would never have been such a person as me in this world. Therefore, I had never thought highly of anybody who had a pig belly-shaped face, no matter how others praised her for being beautiful. However, I had never figured out, as a mere teenager, why my father could be so determined about gaining more education when the entire family was against this. My mother later told me that my father was the eldest student in his class. As a fourth grader at the elementary school, he was already 18 years old. He studied very hard and showed various talents in different areas. He was good at singing, playing musical instruments, basketball, swimming, calligraphy, and writing. The essays he wrote were spread amongst all the students in the entire county as good examples, and my mother had also read them in school. So, my father was quite a figure even then. In the 1960s, at the age of 27, my father was admitted to the Southwest University of Political Science and Law in Sichuan Province, and thus became the first ever university student in his village. This caused quite a sensation among all the villagers. As far as I can remember, father told me only one story about his university life, and that was about a secret skill for obtaining one more bowl of rice. When my father was attending university, China was experiencing the so-called 3 years of natural disasters. It should actually be called the 3 years of the Great Chinese Famine, when 20 to 43 millions were starved to death, according to some scholars. My father said, when it was mealtime in the university, everybody ate in the dining hall. With 8 people sitting at each table, rice was supplied with a big pot for everyone to share. At that time, every student was so hungry and was ready to fight for food like a wolf. As soon as the pot was placed on the table, everybody immediately put as much rice as possible into their own bowl and then ate with all their might. However, my father only filled half of his bowl, so he could always finish earlier than others. Then he would fill his bowl with rice as much as he could and enjoy it with much ease and leisure. In this way, he could eat half a bowl more rice than others. When he told me this story, my father smiled with pride and an almost unnoticeable trace of cunning, which one could only see on the face of a Chinese peasant. However, I doubt how successful my father was with this kind of tactic. Mother told me that he suffered from hunger edema because of starvation and almost died in the hospital. My mother also told me that life was extremely hard for my father then. His family couldn't offer him any financial support. Every weekend, he had to work very hard as a loader at the Chaotianmen port in Zhongjiang City to earn some money to cover his most basic expenses. In 1964, my father graduated from university and was assigned to work as a teacher at Mianyang Finance and Trade Cadre Training School in Sichuan Province. At that time, my mother had been teaching for several years in a remote village primary school. Although my mother's foster parents were proletarian, her biological mother later married someone who was classified by the CCP as a thug. As a result, my mother also became an outcast. She wasn't allowed to go to high school after graduating from junior middle school. Going to a university was even less possible for her. As a very proud young girl, my mother felt too ashamed to face anybody, so she ran away from the city, hid in a remote village, and became an elementary school teacher there. At that time, she was only 16 years old. In 1965, my parents married each other, but they weren't able to move to the same place. Their workplaces were about 100 kilometers, or about 62 miles apart from each other. At that time, everything was controlled by the party, and nobody could just move to another place or change their jobs freely. In 1996, I was born as their first child. And exactly at that year, the unprecedented Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution began. In 1967, when I was only 1 year old, my father was accused of being a black pawn of reactionary capitalist rulers. At that time, he had developed acute hepatitis and was hospitalized. However, nobody cared about his illness. He was dragged from the hospital to the big stage to be publicly denounced. His hands were painted with black ink to indicate his identity as the black pawn of reactionary capitalist rulers. After the public denunciation, he was ordered to write dozens of copies of self-criticism and to post them at appointed places. As father was too weak to move at all, this grand task had to be accomplished by my mother, who was having maternity leave and staying with my father in Mianyang then. She tied me to her back with cotton tape, with a bucket of self-made flour paste in one hand and a big roll of dozens of self-criticism letters, which had been hand-copied with a big brush pen in the other hand, and went out to post the letters. It took her the entire night to post them all. When I was 2 or 3 years old, my father was relocated to a remote township called Hanwang in Zhongjiang County, Sichuan Province. There were only about 30,000 people in the town, and that town was also about 100 kilometers or 62 miles away from my mother's school. The workplace for my father to settle down to be reformed was a cereal processing machinery factory, which was newly built on a barren floodplain with barely nothing inside it yet. My first sister was born when I was 4 years old. My mother couldn't take care of 2 children on her own, as she also needed to work. So I was sent to my father and started living on that barren footplane with him. Every year my father would take me to visit my father and sister. 100 kilometers seems nothing for today. However, it felt very, very far at that time, especially because my mother's school was located in deep mountains. We needed to transfer between long-distance buses several times, climb over several mountains, and walk long mountain trails before we could reach our final destiny. My mother told me that she nearly cried when she saw me for the first time after I had left her. My lovely round face shrank so much that it seemed that only 2 big twinkly eyes were left. What my father couldn't bear was that my father only knew to wash and wipe my 2 cheeks, and left all other parts uncleaned. As a result, my neck and the skin behind my ears were left very dirty. My 2 ship-home-shaped braids were also unbalanced, with one higher than the other. My mother felt extremely upset upon seeing her lovely daughter changed like that. Once, after we had finished our stay at Mom's place and were about to leave, my mother gave me a letter and asked me to give it to my father when we arrived at our other home in Hanwang. I felt extremely excited at being entrusted with such an important task, and didn't know how I should carry the letter to match its importance. The excitement went on for quite a while before I finally couldn't bear such a big burden or hide such a huge secret anymore. And the consequence was that I couldn't help revealing the secret to my father after we walked along the mountain road and were waiting for the long-distance bus. After reading the letter, my father didn't say a word. He abruptly put me onto his back and started walking back. Upon arriving at Mom's place, my father still didn't say anything. He lied down in bed with a very stern and pale face. I was really terrified, not knowing what had happened. I also feared that my mother could scold me for not listening to her and give the letter to my father too early. Only after many years did I learn vaguely what had happened on that day. My mother actually asked for a divorce in that letter, as she couldn't bear the hardship of not being able to live together any longer. I heard that my father tried everything, including a suicide threat, to have my mother abandon the thought of divorce. Mother was very well known for her beauty in Zhongjiang County when she was young, and she had a lot of admirers. My father was just one of them. When my father was in university, he kept writing beautiful letters and poems to my mother. Each time he wrote, he used a different font style. His handwriting and poems were both extremely beautiful and touching, and full of talent. His persistence and brilliant literary skill finally won my mother's heart. However, my mother had never expected that one day this brilliant talent would become a blank poem of reactionary capitalist rulers overnight. How long did she have to suffer as the wife of a blank poem of reactionary capitalist rulers?